We all thought we knew the story of Jenny and Sumit, a story of forbidden love, of cultural clashes, of a decade-long struggle against family and tradition. We watched them navigate a secret relationship, a shocking revelation of a prior marriage, and the seemingly insurmountable wall of his parents' disapproval. We believe this was a one-in-a-million love story, a testament to the idea that love conquers all. But what if it was just one of a dozen? What if Jenny wasn't the one and only, but simply the one who made it to the finish line? A brave woman has come forward from Sumit's past, and she hasn't just brought a story. She's brought the playbook, a handwritten journal, Sumit's own words that details every step of a cold, calculated 15-year scam. From a chapter titled Initial Contact to the final chilling entry, Securing the Will. We're looking at a weathered notebook, and on the page, a title written in a young man's confident scrawl, The Jenny Protocol, Phase 4, Familial Alienation Tactics. Everything we thought we knew is about to be turned inside out. If you are ready to question every tear, every fight, and every romantic moment you've ever seen between Sumit and Jenny, then you are in the right place. This goes deeper than you could ever imagine. Before we pull back the curtain on this entire operation, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. You have found the one channel that is willing to uncover the truth. And trust me, you will not want to miss a single revelation as we dismantle this story piece by piece. Let's begin by recalibrating our understanding of the Singh family. For years, we've seen them through the lens of a traditional Indian family struggling to accept their son's unconventional choice. We saw Sadhna's tears, Anil's stern lectures. We interpreted their resistance as a genuine, if frustrating, expression of their cultural values and parental concern. But the information that has now come to light suggests a far more sinister interpretation. This wasn't a family reacting to a crisis. This was a team of long-con artists executing a script. This was a patient, multi-generational coven of inheritance hunters, and Sumit wasn't the rebellious son, he was their most valuable asset, their closer. The foundational lie, the one upon which this entire television narrative was built, is that Sumit's affection for Jenny is genuine and unique. The fictional truth, the one that has been carefully hidden for over a decade, is that Sumit has been trained since he was a teenager to feign devotion, to mirror the desires of his targets, and to exploit the vulnerabilities of lonely, financially secure Western women. The family's objections, the endless drama, the manufactured delays, it was all part of the playbook. It wasn't an obstacle to their love. It was a calculated strategy designed to create a shared struggle. This us against the world mentality is one of the most powerful tools of psychological manipulation. It forges a bond of dependency that is nearly impossible to break, making the victim feel that her predator is her only true ally in the world. And this operation, this family business, was terrifyingly successful long before Jenny ever entered the picture. Based on documents and testimony that have recently surfaced, it's estimated that this scheme has scammed at least 3 other women out of a combined total of over $900,000 in gifts, loans, and smaller inheritance payouts. Jenny wasn't the first. She was just the most public and potentially the most profitable. To understand how this was possible, we need to meet the woman who started it all, the one who broke the silence. Her name is Eleanor Vance. She is a 68-year-old retired teacher from a quiet coastal town in Australia. She is not a reality TV star. She is a grandmother, a lover of books, a woman who, in 2008, was grieving the loss of her husband of 40 years and found herself profoundly lonely. And it was in this state of vulnerability that she became Sumit's target. From 2008 to 2011, Eleanor believed she was in a loving, long-distance relationship with a charming young man from India who understood her soul. Over those 3 years, she lost over $150,000 to him and his family. The scam only ended when her son, a private investigator by trade, grew so concerned that he launched his own investigation, uncovered the fraud, and presented his mother with irrefutable evidence that forced her to cut contact. For more than a decade, Eleanor lived with the deep shame and humiliation of what had happened. She told no one outside of her immediate family. The experiences shattered her confidence and her ability to trust. Then one evening, she was flipping through the channels and saw a familiar face on her television screen. It was Sumit, and he was with an American woman, Jenny. As Eleanor watched, a cold dread washed over her. He was using the same phrases, the same stories, the same promises. The family drama playing out on screen was an echo of the drama that had been described to her in countless emails and phone calls. She was watching her own story, her own trauma, being repackaged and sold to the world as a grand romance. It was then she decided she could no longer remain silent. She had to speak out, not for revenge, but to expose the playbook she knew he was using, the very playbook she had once held in her hands. This brings us to the core of this entire conspiracy, the smoking gun, a simple, spiral-bound notebook. During a particularly intense phase of their relationship, Sumit, in a moment of youthful arrogance and a bizarre attempt to impress Eleanor with his business acumen, had shown her his journal. He had framed it as his life plan, his guide to success. It detailed, with chilling specificity, every step of the con. Eleanor, already harboring a sliver of doubt planted by her son, felt a chill run down her spine. Under the guise of admiring his ambition, she asked to borrow it for a day to study his methods. In that 24-hour period, she took it to a copy shop and photocopied every single page before returning the original. It was this copied document that she kept hidden away for years, a painful reminder of her own gullibility. And it is this document that now forms the basis of the case against the Singh family. The playbook is methodical, a step-by-step guide to psychological and financial predation. It's divided into phases. Phase 1 is titled Love Bombing and Target Acquisition. It outlines the ideal victim profile, a widow or recent divorcee, aged 55 or older, with a paid-off home, a pension, and a strained or distant relationship with her children. It lists specific online forums and early social media sites where these women might congregate. It contains scripted opening lines, designed to be both flattering and disarming. One line, highlighted in the journal, reads, "Your profile picture shows a sadness in your eyes, but it is the sadness of a beautiful soul that has given too much and received too little. I want to be the one who changes that." Compare this to the story of how Sumit, as Michael Jones, first contacted Jenny. He presented himself as a handsome younger man who saw past her age and saw the beautiful soul inside. It was a textbook. The love bombing phase, according to the journal, must be relentless, constant communication, declarations of undying love within weeks, future planning, promises of marriage, and a life together. The goal is to create an emotional whirlwind, a dependency so strong that the victim's critical thinking is overwhelmed by a flood of dopamine and oxytocin. He becomes her sole source of validation and happiness. Phase 2, as detailed in Sumit's journal, is called Introduce an Insurmountable Problem. This is the genius of the scam. Most cons try to present a perfect fantasy. The Singh family understood that a perfect fantasy is fragile. A shared struggle, however, is resilient. The problem creates a narrative where the victim is no longer just a passive recipient of love. She becomes a partner, a savior, a crucial part of the story. For Eleanor, the problem was a fabricated family debt. Sumit told her his father's business was on the verge of collapse due to a dishonest partner, and that the family faced losing their home. He claimed, desperately trying to hold it all together, and the stress was killing him. He didn't ask for money directly at first. He just shared his unbearable burden, letting her offer. The first transfer was for $5,000, a loan to tide them over. With Jenny, the problem was even more dramatic and effective: his secret arranged marriage. This wasn't just a financial problem, it was a deeply emotional, romantic obstacle. It positioned Sumit as a tragic hero, trapped by tradition, fighting for his one true love. And it positioned Jenny as his rescuer. Every dollar she sent him wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon in their shared war for freedom. The family's disapproval was the masterstroke. It wasn't an inconvenience, it was the entire point. It was the fuel for the fire of their shared struggle, keeping Jenny locked in a state of perpetual crisis where Sumit was her only anchor. Phase 3 is where the cruelty of the protocol becomes truly apparent. It's titled Isolation and Control, Severing External Support. The journal outlines a systematic process for turning the victim against her own family and friends. It describes how to identify the most skeptical person in the victim's inner circle, usually a protective child or a cynical best friend, and neutralize them. The tactic is to reframe their concern as control. With Eleanor, Sumit would constantly chip away at her son's credibility. After she would get off the phone with him, Sumit would say things like, "He treats you like a child, Eleanor. He doesn't trust your judgment. He's afraid of losing his inheritance. He doesn't want to see you happy because it means he's no longer the center of your world." He twisted a son's love into a selfish, manipulative ploy. Now think about Jenny and her daughters. We saw their concern on the show. We saw them question Sumit's intentions, and we saw Jenny, time and time again, defend him, push them away, and choose him over their advice. She was following the script perfectly. The protocol dictated that Sumit must become the victim's sole confidant, the only one who truly understands. By creating a wedge between the victim and her support system, the family ensures that when the major financial requests begin, there is no one left to raise a red flag. The victim is alone, emotionally dependent, and completely under their control. Phase 4, the endgame, is clinically titled Asset Liquidation and Transfer. This phase details the escalation of financial requests. It starts small with emergencies, a medical bill, a car repair. These are tests of compliance. Once the victim is conditioned to send money, the amounts increase. For Eleanor, the $5,000 loan for the family business was followed by a request for $10,000 for a specialist doctor for his mother, then $20,000 for legal fees to fight the fictional business partner. It was a slow, steady bleed, always accompanied by promises of repayment once their problems were solved and they could finally be together. In Jenny's case, we know she gave Sumit a significant amount of her life savings. She supported him for years. The playbook notes that the ultimate goal is to secure power of attorney or to be written into the will. It even includes a section on life insurance policies, advising to gently inquire about them and suggest becoming the beneficiary as the ultimate proof of love and commitment. The goal was never just to bleed them dry with loans. It was to secure the entire inheritance, the final prize. The narrative we've been fed is that Sumit was a call center employee who fell in love. But the truth is far more complex. The entire family was in on it. And the proof of this comes from a completely unexpected source, an internal betrayal that blows the case wide open. A woman has come forward, Sumit's own cousin. Let's call her Priya. When the scam against Eleanor was in full swing, Priya was just a teenager. Her role in the family business was small but significant. She was tasked by Sadhna with writing traditional letters to Eleanor. These letters, written in Priya's neat, youthful handwriting, spoke of how the family was slowly coming around, how they admired Eleanor's strength and devotion, and how they looked forward to one day welcoming her to the family. It was all a lie, of course, designed to make Eleanor feel accepted and to lower her defenses. Now Priya is a mother herself. For years, she carried the guilt of her role in the deception. When she saw Sumit and Jenny's story on television, she was horrified. It was the same script, the same lies, but this time it was being broadcast to millions. She saw the pain in Jenny's eyes and saw a reflection of the pain she knew Eleanor must have endured. Her conscience could no longer bear the weight. She decided to act. She contacted Eleanor's son, and she came bearing gifts, the family's old financial records from that period. Ledgers, bank statements, documents that Sadhna and Anil thought were long gone. And these documents were the final nail in the coffin. They showed, in black and white, direct wire transfers from Eleanor Vance's Australian bank account into accounts controlled by Sumit, which were then immediately transferred to accounts funding Anil's new business ventures and a down payment on a new family property. There was no ambiguity. The money wasn't for a sick mother or a legal battle. It was a direct investment into the Singh family's portfolio, funded by a lonely widow's life savings. This new evidence transformed the situation. For Eleanor's son, the private investigator, this was no longer just about his mother's personal tragedy. It was a documented case of international wire fraud. Armed with the playbook and the financial records, he began to dig deeper. He realized that the family's methods were too refined for Eleanor to have been their first attempt. He started searching online communities, looking for stories that matched the pattern. It didn't take long. He found a woman in Canada, a divorcee who had lost nearly $50,000 to Sumit between 2006 and 2007 before Eleanor in a scam involving a supposed visa application fee that never materialized. He found another woman from the UK who was targeted after Eleanor. From 2000 to 2014, she had lost over $200,000, believing she was funding Sumit's master's degree in business, which would allow him to move to England and be with her. The pattern was undeniable. The playbook was real. With this mountain of evidence, Sumit's own handwritten confession, the damning financial records provided by his cousin, and the testimony of multiple victims, Eleanor Vance took a monumental step. She filed a civil lawsuit in an international court, a venue designed to handle cross-border disputes for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She wasn't just suing Sumit, she was suing the entire Singh family, Sumit, Sadhna, and Anil, as co-conspirators in a long-running criminal enterprise. Simultaneously, her son took the evidence to the Australian Federal Police. An investigator specializing in elder exploitation and international fraud saw the case for what it was, a clear-cut example of a predatory romance scam, but with a level of organization and family involvement he had rarely seen. The amounts involved were substantial enough to trigger a federal investigation. The AFP opened a case file on the Singh family for international wire fraud and exploitation of a vulnerable person, and per protocol, they reached out to their counterparts in India. The Indian authorities, presented with the detailed evidence, began their own investigation. They discovered that the business Anil had funded with Eleanor's money had a history of questionable dealings. The Singh family, who had presented themselves as upstanding members of their community, were suddenly under a microscope, with law enforcement from 2 different continents closing in on them. The television drama was about to become a very real legal nightmare. The legal proceedings were a spectacle. The International Court, recognizing the public interest due to the television show, allowed cameras in the courtroom. The world was about to see the fairy tale dismantled under oath. The prosecution's strategy was devastatingly effective. Their opening move was to project a page from Sumit's playbook onto a giant screen in the courtroom. It was the page from Phase 2, Introduce an Insurmountable Problem. The text read, "The obstacle must feel both traditional and personal. A pre-existing marriage is the perfect tool. It creates sympathy, casts the subject as a victim, and justifies years of delays and financial need for legal battles. It transforms the victim from a home wrecker into a savior." Then the prosecutor played a clip from 90 Day Fiancé, The Other Way. It was the scene where Sumit tearfully confesses to Jenny that he is already married. He used phrases almost identical to the ones suggested in the playbook for creating maximum emotional impact. The courtroom was silent. On one side of the screen was the cold, calculated instruction manual for fraud. On the other was the real emotional moment that millions of viewers had believed. They were one and the same. They went through the playbook, phase by phase, matching Sumit's own written words to his televised actions. For Phase 3, Familial Alienation Tactics, they showed the journal entry. Consistently frame her children's advice as an attempt to control her or steal her happiness. Remind her that only you understand her true heart. Then they played a montage of clips. Jenny on the phone with her daughters, defending Sumit, telling them they just don't understand their connection, growing more and more distant with each season. The prosecution argued that Jenny wasn't just being stubborn. She was a victim of a documented psychological manipulation campaign, and the proof was in the perpetrator's own handwriting. Eleanor Vance's testimony was the emotional core of the trial. She spoke with a quiet dignity, her voice trembling at times but never breaking. She described her loneliness after her husband's death, the joy and hope Sumit brought into her life, and the slow, sickening realization that it was all a lie. She read aloud from the love letters Sumit had sent her voice cracking as she recounted the promises of a life together in Australia. Then she read a passage from his playbook about the importance of mirroring the target's retirement dreams to build a false sense of a shared future. She wasn't just a victim recounting a crime. She was a teacher, dissecting the anatomy of her own deception for the world to see. She held up the photocopied pages, her hands shaking slightly. "This was his Bible," she said, "and I was his sermon." But the prosecution had one more bombshell. They called 2 more witnesses. First, the woman from Canada, a retired nurse named Isabel. She told an eerily similar story: the love bombing, the charm, and then the insurmountable problem. A sick father who needed an expensive experimental surgery that wasn't available in India. She had drained her retirement account of $50,000 to save him. The father, of course, was perfectly healthy. She only found out years later when a suspicious bank teller alerted her son to the unusual wire transfers. Then they called the woman from the UK, a graphic designer named Chloe. Her story was, in some ways, the most heartbreaking. She had been with Sumit for 2 years, after Eleanor. For her, the problem was his ambition. He wanted to get a master's degree in the UK so they could be together. He had the grades, he had the acceptance letter, all forged, it turned out. But he didn't have the tuition. She took out a second mortgage on her flat. She sent him over $200,000 over 2 years, all while his family sent her letters, written by young Priya, telling her how proud they were of her for investing in their son's future. The money, the prosecution showed through the financial records, was used to purchase 2 new cars and to renovate the family home. The defense, led by a lawyer hired by Anil, was weak. They tried to paint Sumit as a foolish young man who wrote a fantasy journal, a work of fiction. They claimed the relationships were genuine, if unconventional, and that the money sent by the women were gifts, freely given. But under cross-examination, Sumit crumbled. When asked to explain specific detailed entries in his playbook, like a checklist for faking emotion on video calls, including bite inside of cheek to produce tears if necessary, he had no answer. He stared at his hands, a man whose script had finally run out. Sadhna and Anil maintained a stoic, defiant silence, but the financial records were undeniable. The money from Eleanor, Isabel, and Chloe had flowed directly into their pockets. They were not disapproving parents. They were the board of directors of a predatory enterprise. The climax of the trial arrived with the closing statements. The prosecution lawyer walked slowly in front of the jury and the judges. He did not raise his voice. He simply laid out the facts. For 15 years, he began, the Singh family has operated not as a family, but as a pack of wolves. They sought out the lonely, the grieving, the vulnerable. They offered the illusion of love, a warm light in the darkness, and when their victims were drawn in, they devoured their savings, their security, and their trust in humanity. They are not parents. They are predators. They are not a son. He is a lure. And this, he said, holding up a copy of the playbook, is not a diary. It is a hunting manual. He then turned and looked directly at where Jenny was reported to be watching the proceedings online. The only difference with their latest victim is that they got greedy. They put their scam on television, and in the bright lights of global fame, their dark secrets could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. The wait for the verdict was tense. The world watched. The entire legacy of one of reality TV's most iconic couples hung in the balance. When the judge finally re-entered the courtroom, his face was grim. He began by addressing the Singh family directly. It is the finding of this court that you have engaged in a coordinated, malicious, and deeply cruel conspiracy to commit fraud. You have weaponized human emotion. You have preyed upon the lonely. You are not a family bound by love, but a criminal enterprise bound by greed. He paused, looking at Sumit, then his parents. There is a term for creatures that sustain themselves by draining the life force of others. You are emotional vampires, and this court will not allow you to claim another victim. The judgment was swift and severe. The Singh family was found guilty on all counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge awarded Eleanor Vance a massive settlement covering her initial $150,000 loss, plus punitive damages and emotional distress, totaling over $1 million. He placed liens on all known Singh family assets, the properties, the businesses, the cars, to ensure the payment. He also forwarded the court's findings to the Australian and Indian authorities, recommending criminal charges. For Sumit, Sadhna, and Anil, the game was over. The family business was bankrupt, and their freedom was now in jeopardy. The fallout from the verdict was a global media firestorm. The story was everywhere. News outlets that had once covered Sumit and Jenny's love story with a kind of bemused affection now reported on the widow hunter scam with cold, hard facts. The core belief of the show, the very premise of their entire narrative arc, was invalidated. It was never about love against the odds. It was a meticulously planned financial crime, and Jenny was simply the final mark. For Jenny, the reckoning was absolute and public. She was forced to confront the horrifying reality that her entire life for the past decade had been a lie. Every romantic word Sumit had ever whispered, every tear he had shed, every shared struggle they had endured, it was all a performance, a rehearsed part from a script he had written as a teenager. The family's cruelty wasn't a trial to be overcome. It was a tactic to isolate her. His love wasn't a rebellion, it was a job. She was not his soulmate. She was his retirement plan. She wasn't a wife. She was the most successful victim in a long line of them. The public shame was inescapable. Fans who had championed her, who had defended her choices and celebrated her perseverance, now filled social media with a mixture of pity and a kind of morbid "I told you so." The woman who had given up everything for love was now the poster child for the ultimate romantic betrayal. The final images that emerged were not of a happy couple. They were paparazzi shots of Jenny, looking gaunt and broken, entering a lawyer's office. The last piece of news to break was a short, sterile announcement from her attorney. Annulment papers had been filed. The grounds were fraud. Her love story, the one that had captivated millions, was officially reclassified for what it truly was, a meticulously executed financial transaction. Her marriage was not being dissolved. It was being voided, as if it had never truly existed in the first place. This is the ultimate betrayal of trust. The entire love story was a lie, a carefully constructed stage play designed for an audience of one, and then for millions. The question that remains is a haunting one. Does this make Sumit the most monstrous villain in 90-day history? A man who didn't just lie, but who built a decade-long system of emotional predation with his entire family? Let me know in the comments. Do you believe Jenny could ever recover from a betrayal this deep? The verdict was in, the annulment was filed, and the world believed the story was over. But the end of a trial is rarely the end of the story. For the victims, it's merely the end of one chapter of a book they will carry for the rest of their lives. And for the perpetrators, it is often just the beginning of a new, more desperate fight. The courtroom drama we just witnessed was the public execution of a lie. But what happens in the silent moments that follow? What happens when the cameras turn off and Jenny is left alone in a quiet room with nothing but a decade of memories that have all been reclassified as evidence in a fraud case? That is where our story truly continues, because the Singh family, cornered and exposed, would not go down without a fight. And Jenny, stripped of her identity as a beloved wife, would have to embark on the most difficult journey of all, the journey to find out who she was, if she was never Sumit's one true love. Her descent began not with a bang, but with a quiet, creeping horror. In the initial days after the verdict, Jenny was in a state of profound shock, a self-imposed quarantine from the truth. She refused to believe it. Her mind, conditioned by 10 years of his voice, his touch, his narrative, simply could not accept the new reality. She told her daughters, who had flown to her side, that it was all a misunderstanding. The playbook was a fantasy, she insisted, her voice hollow. Something a stupid boy wrote years ago. It doesn't mean anything. He loved me. I know he loved me. Sadhna and Anil, they corrupted him. They forced him into this. She was clinging to the foundational lie, trying to save Sumit from the wreckage, to preserve at least one piece of her life that felt real. Her daughters, patient and heartbroken, didn't argue. They simply sat with her as she obsessively scrolled through old photos, her finger tracing Sumit's smiling face. "Look at his eyes here," she would whisper. "You can't fake that. That was real." But the poison of the truth had already entered her system. Doubt was a slow-acting acid, dissolving the glossy finish of her memories. One night, unable to sleep, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went back and watched the early seasons of their story on the show. She was searching for proof of his love, a moment so genuine it would invalidate the entire court case. Instead, she found her own horror movie. She watched their first meeting, and instead of seeing romance, she saw a predator sizing up his prey. She saw the lines he used, lines she now knew were from phase 1 of his playbook, love bombing. She watched his tearful confession about his marriage, and she could almost see the note in the playbook, bite inside of cheek to produce tears. She saw every argument with his parents not as a painful family dispute, but as a meticulously staged piece of theater from phase 2, introduce an insurmountable problem. The show she had once seen as a testament to her love story had become a documentary of her own fleecing. Each episode was a new exhibit in the case against her own judgment. The breaking point came when she watched a scene where her daughter, Christina, confronted Sumit, questioning his intentions and his lack of a job. Jenny saw herself on screen jump to his defense, getting angry at Christina, telling her she didn't understand. And she remembered the entry from phase 3. Isolate from her family. Reframe their concern as control. In that moment, the final wall of her denial crumbled. It wasn't just that he had lied to her. It was that he had used her love as a weapon to turn her against her own children. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that she collapsed, sobbing into a grief more profound than any she had ever known. She wasn't just mourning the loss of a husband, she was mourning the loss of an entire decade of her life, a decade in which she had been the unknowing star of a very cruel play. While Jenny was grappling with her shattered reality, the Singh family was launching a counteroffensive in India. The international court's verdict was a civil judgment. The criminal charges recommended by the Australian and Indian authorities were a separate matter, and one that would be tried on their home turf. And here they had an advantage. They immediately hired a high-powered legal team known for its skill in public relations. Their strategy was to reframe the entire narrative for the Indian public. They began leaking stories to the local press, painting a picture that was a mirror image of the truth. In this new version of the story, the Singh family were the victims. They were a simple, traditional family whose naive son had been seduced and entrapped by a wealthy, predatory Western woman. Jenny was portrayed as a homewrecker who had used her money and influence to destroy their family and turn their son against them. Eleanor Vance was a scorned ex-lover, a jealous woman colluding with Jenny to exact revenge. They claimed the playbook was a work of fiction, a young man's silly creative writing project that had been stolen and twisted into something sinister. Sadhna gave tearful interviews to sympathetic journalists, portraying herself as a heartbroken mother who had only ever wanted to protect her son from a woman who was old enough to be his grandmother. They masterfully played on cultural and nationalist sentiments. Their lawyers argued in the court of public opinion that this was another case of Western arrogance, of foreigners coming to India and imposing their values, trying to imprison a good Indian boy who had made a mistake. They became a cause célèbre for conservative groups, a symbol of Indian tradition under attack from Western decadence. The strategy was brilliant and insidious. They were using the very same tactics of manipulation and narrative control on their entire country that they had used on individual women for 15 years, and to a certain extent, it was working. The path to criminal justice in India was suddenly looking far more complicated. But as the Singhs fought their PR war, the financial investigation against them was quietly uncovering a much deeper, more organized conspiracy. The authorities following the money trail, using the records Priya had provided as a starting point, realized that the $90,000 from the Canadian victim, the $150,000 from Eleanor, and the $200,000 from the UK victim were just the beginning. The money didn't just go to cars and home renovations. A significant portion of it was routed through a shady financial advisor in Delhi. This wasn't some local accountant. This man was a specialist, a professional money launderer for a whole network of romance scammers. His records, once seized, opened up a Pandora's box. The Singh family was not an isolated case. They were part of a larger, loosely affiliated network of families across northern India, all running variations of the same scam. This advisor provided them with services. He cleaned the foreign money, issued fake employment letters, and connected them with document forgers who could create anything from a fake university acceptance letter to a forged death certificate for a non-existent sick relative. The Singhs weren't the masterminds, they were a highly successful franchise. The playbook wasn't just Sumit's invention, it was likely a template, a best practices guide shared among the network, which Sumit had copied and personalized in his youthful arrogance. The investigation had stumbled upon a hidden cottage industry of heartbreak. This was no longer about one family, it was about dismantling a criminal syndicate that had likely defrauded hundreds of women out of millions of dollars over 2 decades. In the midst of this expanding investigation, the story of Priya, the cousin who had blown the whistle, took a dark turn. For her act of conscience, she was branded a traitor. Her family, the extended Singh clan, completely disowned her. She received threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. She was a pariah in her own community. The same people who were publicly defending Sumit as a victim were privately terrorizing the woman who had dared to tell the truth. She was forced to flee her home with her husband and young child, essentially going into hiding. It was Eleanor's son, the private investigator, who arranged for their security and relocation. He felt a profound responsibility for her, the woman whose bravery had broken the case open. Priya's story was a stark reminder of the immense pressure and danger involved in breaking ranks within these tight-knit criminal family structures. Her sacrifice had been immense, and her life had been irrevocably changed. The widening scope of the criminal network also began to cast a shadow on the one entity that had, until now, remained largely unscathed: the television network and the production company behind 90 Day Fiancé. Questions that had once been whispers on fan forums were now being asked by serious journalists. What did the network know, and when did they know it? How could they have filmed this couple for years and not seen the signs of a long con? An anonymous source, a former field producer for the show, leaked a series of emails to an investigative reporter. The emails were explosive. They showed that the production team was well aware of Sumit's constant financial emergencies. There were discussions among producers about the unusual number of loans Jenny was giving him, which often happened off-camera. In one email, a producer wrote, "Sumit's story about needing another $5,000 for the divorce lawyer is changing. Last week it was a filing fee, this week it's a bribe for a clerk. We need to get him to stick to one story for continuity." The leak revealed that the production's primary concern wasn't the potential fraud being committed against their cast member, but ensuring the on-screen narrative was coherent. The red flags were not just ignored, they were curated for television. The source claimed that the family's resistance often felt too perfect, too dramatic, and that Sumit had an uncanny ability to produce tears on cue for a dramatic scene. The family's dramatic fights were ratings gold, and the network had little incentive to scrutinize the reality behind the reality TV. They weren't necessarily complicit in the crime, but the email suggested a willful blindness, a culture that prioritized drama over the duty of care to its subjects. The network was now facing a massive scandal of its own, with critics accusing them of profiting from the exploitation of a vulnerable woman. And it was during the discovery process for the Indian criminal trial that the final, most shocking twist of all was revealed. The prosecution, digging into the Singh family's history, uncovered something that recontextualized the entire 15-year scam. They found evidence of an earlier scam, a much smaller one, from the late 1990s. It was a pre-internet pen pal version of the same con. A lonely woman in Germany had been defrauded out of about $30,000. But the perpetrator wasn't a teenage Sumit. The love letters, the story of family trouble, the requests for money, they were all from a young Anil Singh, Sumit's father. And tucked away in Anil's old belongings was another notebook, a rough draft, with the same chapter headings, the same tactics, the same cold, calculating methodology. The Jenny protocol was not Sumit's invention at all. It was his father's. Anil was the original architect of the scam. He had run it himself in his youth, and as the internet age dawned, he saw the potential for a far more lucrative operation. But he was too old to be the romantic lead. So he did something truly monstrous. He trained his own son. Sumit wasn't just a predator, he was a product. He had been groomed since he was a teenager to be the family's closer, the handsome face of a multi-generational con. This revelation was horrifying. It explained the family's seamless coordination. It explained why Sumit, even in his moments of apparent guilt, could never break free. He had been conditioned his entire life for this role. It didn't absolve him of his crimes, but it painted a chilling portrait of a young man who was both a perpetrator and, in a twisted way, a victim of his own father's sociopathy. The Singh family wasn't just a coven of inheritance hunters. It was a dynasty of deceit, passed down from father to son. The criminal trial in India, despite the Singh's PR campaign, ended in a conviction. The evidence, particularly the financial trail leading to the wider network and Anil's original playbook, was simply too overwhelming. Anil and Sadhna received significant prison sentences for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. As the groomed protege rather than the mastermind, Sumit received a lesser sentence, but a prison sentence nonetheless. The Indian justice system, once it saw the full scope of the organized criminal ring operating on its soil, came down hard. In the aftermath, the landscape had changed. The television network, facing lawsuits and a massive public backlash, issued a public apology and announced a complete overhaul of its vetting and psychological support systems for cast members. Several high-level producers were fired. The Widow Hunter network in northern India was systematically dismantled by authorities, with dozens of arrests being made based on the evidence uncovered in the Singh investigation. And what of Jenny? Her journey did not end with the final guilty verdict. For a long time, she was adrift. The world now knew her story not as a romance, but as a case study in victimhood. But slowly, with the help of her daughters and intensive therapy, she began to find a new path. The turning point came when she received a letter from Eleanor Vance. Eleanor wrote about her own years of shame and how speaking out, as terrifying as it was, had been the first step toward reclaiming her own life. She invited Jenny not to grieve the past, but to use it. Inspired by Eleanor's strength, Jenny found a new purpose. She was uniquely positioned to help others. She knew the playbook. She knew the tactics. She knew the crippling self-doubt that kept victims silent. Together, Jenny and Eleanor, with the help of Eleanor's son, established a nonprofit foundation called the Playbook Project. Its mission is to educate the public about the tactics of romance scammers and to provide a support network for victims, helping them navigate the legal system and the long, painful road of emotional recovery. Jenny, the woman who had lost a decade of her life to a lie, was now using her intimate knowledge of that lie to protect others. She started speaking publicly, not as a victim, but as a survivor and an expert. Her voice, once used to defend her predator, was now a powerful weapon against him and others like him. She never found romantic love again, but she found something more profound. A sense of self, a purpose, and the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who had walked through the heart of a meticulously crafted darkness and had, against all odds, found her own way back to the light. The story of Jenny and Sumit will forever be a cautionary tale, a permanent stain on the history of reality television. It forces us to ask ourselves what we are really watching when we consume these stories. Are we watching love, or are we watching a carefully edited illusion? The Singh family built an empire on the weaponization of hope. They knew that the desire to be loved, To be seen is the most powerful and vulnerable of all human emotions. But the final chapter of this story proves that the truth, once it is finally brought to light, can be an even more powerful force. The ultimate question this saga leaves us with is one we must all consider in our own lives, online and off. How do we learn to trust our hearts without losing our minds? And how can we be sure that the love story we're in is one we are writing ourselves and not one that is being written for us?